If there is one thing that is super important to know when it comes to lower chest training, it's what we're going to talk about today. And it's a thing that I don't think very many people, in my experience at least, are aware of. So, what is it and why is it so important? Normally, when people think about the lower chest, they just think about bringing the arm from here to here, right? Something like a dip, a decline press. And those are great. There's nothing wrong with those exercises. But from a function perspective, in terms of our understanding of the lower chest, moving the arm is actually a rather small part of the story. A bigger part of the story is actually how the lower chest, and by the way, this is the lower chest I'm representing in yellow here, is how the lower chest affects the entire shoulder girdle, right? So not just the arm, but also the collarbone and the shoulder blade. Because the lower chest not only pulls the arm forward from this position and downward toward that lower part of the sternum, but it also pulls these bones along with it. And so a lot of times when people are trying to target their low chest and they're told or they're thinking, I need to fix my shoulder blades, I need to not allow my shoulder blades to move, what you are doing is you are actually directly decreasing the amount of involvement that the lower pecs can create in any motion, whether it be a press or a fly, because so much of the length change of the lower pecs will come from this shoulder blade sliding specifically backward and upward, and then downward and forward. So on me, what that would look like is not just allowing my arm to sort of come up to the side like this. Let's say I am doing a lower chest fly with a cable or something similar, but actively shrugging my shoulder upward as far as I can to the ceiling, of course within comfort. And then as I reverse out of that stretched position, I'm driving not just with my hand and my arm, but also my armpit to drive my arm down toward my lower chest. So I want you all as you're watching just to actually feel the difference here. Squeeze your arms inward like this, just approximate your biceps kind of toward the lower part of your chest or your nipple, and just kind of squeeze inward and see how that feels. And then hold that position and stay in that position, and then actively reach a little bit forward. Okay, so hold that position and then reach forward as you squeeze. You will feel so much stronger of a contraction, and that's because in the first variation where you're just squeezing your arms like this, you have this amount of shortening. But then watch what happens here. Between this point yellow, right? All that extra shortening is occurring, okay? Obviously the rubber band is running out of tension here, but you can see that those 2 points are moving closer together. And then on the stretch, just reverse engineer it. So don't just pull your arm back, pull your whole arm back as well as your shoulders and shrug upward and backward toward the ceiling. Because again, if you just move your arm, look at that length change. All right, it's a good amount of length change, but look how much greater the length change is. Watch this point when I go like that, right? All this extra length change. And these low pecs have a huge ability to move this shoulder, okay? So practically speaking, let's look at this in an exercise. Take an example of a lower chest cable fly where we're doing two different variations. So typically the variation that most people do looks something like this, right? People are just kind of focused on moving their arms. They're maybe standing in the middle of the cable stack and they're squeezing their arms together. Overall, by the way, I think this is a fine choice, right? It's not a bad exercise by any means, but if we really want to maximize not just lower pec hypertrophy, lower pec tension and contribution to the motion, but also just general health of our shoulder, right? We want to be able to fully stretch and contract different tissues, and that goes for all muscles, right? So ideally, we sort of pair the concept of growing muscle and getting muscle stronger with keeping that muscle healthy and keeping the joint healthy by working through different ranges of motion, right? So anyway, when we're doing this lower pec variation, you can see that in this one, my arms are kind of doing most of the flapping, right? I'm kind of just pulling my arm inward and downward. And I actually want you all to experiment with this for yourself, okay? Do a version of this chest fly where you're kind of just standing in the middle of it and where you're just squeezing your arms together. Now contrast that with, instead of maybe keeping your arms as rigid or your shoulder blades sort of more pinned, allow your shoulder blades to move, and on the way up, actively shrug your shoulders to get up to the top, and then actively reverse shrug or sort of unshrug your shoulders, almost again in that way we did before, where you're not just driving your hands inward, but you're driving your hands and also your armpits down and inward. Okay, so this is kind of not just a hand-focused movement where we're just driving the hands together, or even an elbow-focused movement, as many people also cue, which I think is a fine cue, but this is kind of like a hand/armpit together thing. So rather than just driving the motion through what looks to be moving, pay attention to your armpits and almost pretend like you are driving your armpits upward and downward toward the floor. That is not only going to contribute to much greater length change, but I think for many of you, it's also going to feel much better. Personally speaking, when I do the more rigid, like arm fixed version, I get a lot of discomfort, even with relatively lower loads. Just that inability for my shoulders to come sort of upward and backward, and that shrugging type motion, for whatever reason, just doesn't give me a lot of comfort. So I personally, and you'll see this in the videos, obviously, prefer to do this in a way where my elbows stay mostly bent as I'm coming backward as I perform that shrug. And then as I perform the sort of reverse shrug where my armpits and my hands are reaching forward and squeezing together, I like to allow my elbows to straighten out. So it's almost, it's not quite like a rigid fly like you would see on a pec neck machine, but it's kind of a row upward like this, and then a press downward and forward again with those armpits sort of reaching toward the bottom. Now, once you have that down pat, you don't want to stay really, really rigid about like thinking about all these cues and just endlessly sort of squeezing things, right? Once you get the motion, you'll feel much, much smoother with it, probably pretty quickly, at least if you're relatively experienced as a lifter. And then once you do that, just progress in load and reps and everything else that you normally would. You don't need to sort of think excessively about the cueing, right? Automatically, it will start to come to you as just this smooth sort of motion where you no longer really need to separate motion of the shoulder blades with motion of the arms, or motion of the armpits with motion of the hands. Like I said earlier, it'll kind of just occur as one sort of more smooth thing. So the overall takeaways from this video: the lower chest plays a humongous role in not just moving the arm, but also the shoulder blade and the collarbone. And what that means in practical application is we don't want to just be smushing the hands together in something like a chest fly. We want to be moving the shoulder blades along with it. We do not want to restrict motion of the shoulder blades pretty much in any context, but especially not any context that involves the chest or the lats or any other muscle that would move the shoulder blade directly. Also keep in mind that this is not just a concept that is specific to the motion that I showed. This is also a concept that would apply to something like a dip, right? Where you're lowering yourself down toward the bottom. You're gonna allow your shoulder blades to shrug up and then press down and sort of forward and inward as we discussed before. It could be a decline dumbbell press, a decline bench press, a machine decline press, any kind of press where you're really trying to optimize for stretch and contraction of these lower pecs. You want to allow those shoulder blades to move. Also make sure that you don't go sort of overboard extreme with it. It's not that more shrugging is always better. Just find and feel a comfortable amount of shrug and a comfortable amount of reach toward that more contracted position, and you'll find the slots that sort of feel comfortable for you. If you enjoyed this video, check the links in the description where you can learn more from me. Thanks for watching, if you're still watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.